former Japanese prime minister and one of the longest serving prime ministers in Japanese history has died, Mr. Shinzo Abe. Unfortunately, he was assassinated while giving a speech in Japan by what appears to be a Japanese citizen. We can get into a little bit of the report. T, do you mind if I play it?
Go for it.
All right.
Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has died after being shot during a campaign speech today. The shooting captured on video. Abe suffered a bullet wound to the right side of his neck and also to his chest. He was rushed from the scene in an ambulance and then transferred by medical helicopter to a hospital where he underwent emergency treatment, but doctors could not stop the bleeding.
Moments after the shots were fired, you could see Abe's security detail tackling the suspect, a local resident in his 40s. The gun he used appears to have been handmade, a motive not known at this time. As Brianna said, Abe was Japan's longest-serving prime minister and was still a towering figure in Japanese and international politics. He had crucial working relationships with both President Obama and President Trump. And this assassination causing shockwaves around the world this morning.
We're doing that in this day and age? We're doing that? Oh.
Yeah. This guy tried to get along with everybody. He held together the trading bloc agreement that ultimately that we tried to accomplish with the TPP. The TPP fell apart when Hillary Clinton lost the 2016 election. Actually, honestly, in the campaigning, in the run-up to the election, because both Hillary and Trump said, fuck the TPP. That's fine. Shinzo Abe held that together because the TPP wasn't just the US. It was all of the Pacific, countries.
Tell our viewers what TPP is.
The Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. So the US and Japan and South Korea were kind of putting this thing together. The US pulled out. Shinzo Abe held the rest of that trading bloc together to put together a trading agreement with everybody else in the Pacific minus China. Because the idea was, how do we deal with Chinese aggression in trade? Well, the idea was, all right, let's get all of the other Pacific countries together in a trade agreement so that we can at least make sure that we have some kind of trade stability amongst ourselves, regardless of what China decides to do. Because China controls a lot when it comes to trade. It was, kind of sort of actually a good idea. But of course, with NAFTA, people didn't want to hear anything about a big trade agreement. And that's just one example. Shinzo Abe did a lot to try to get along with both Obama and with Trump. And he did. He definitely had a backbone when it came to standing up to China
and North Korea.
But and dealing with North Korea. Japan's been pacifist ever since World War II for obvious reasons. He was the first guy really to kind of speak up at his level, at the prime minister level, and say, hey, maybe we actually should, increase a little bit of our military spending, because I see everybody else, including China, increasing theirs. We don't want to be, just sitting here completely defenseless.
He's considered the first modern prime minister of Japan because he's the first one to have been born after World War II. And I'm sure that colored his perspective, which probably gave him the intellectual latitude to have more amicable relations with the West. And to your point, he did get a lot of support for his tough positions against China and North Korea, especially after, I think it was revealed in 2002 that 13 Japanese citizens had been kidnapped by them in the 1970s and the 1980s. I mean, he came from a political dynasty. He comes from at least 3 or 4 generations of family members on both sides of his family who served in politics. And even though he leans conservative, he did seek out more amicable ties with the United States and had a more assertive foreign policy. He supported the sanctions that the UN imposed against North Korea when they were testing nuclear weapons, and also supported the imposition of setting unilateral sanctions on North Korea that included a ban on all visits to Japanese ports by North Korean vessels. He wanted to revise the post-war constitution. He wanted to revise the country's pension and health insurance systems, but he became, just like most politicians, embroiled in a series of scandals, which ultimately resulted in his resignation, and he was succeeded by Fukuda Yasuo. nonetheless, his assassination comes as a surprise. I don't have much information on any speculation as to the reason yet from what I've seen on the international news media. I haven't seen any leaders discuss what the possible reasons are. It seems like they're going towards the lone gunman theory at the moment, but this is so sudden and just so happens. I think more information will come out, and I think what really happened remains to be seen.
All right. Now, if you put your tinfoil hat on, do we think Xi had anything to do with this? And I'm sorry, I'm prefacing that with putting the tinfoil hat on.
If who?
Xi, president of China, because they've all done this traditional song and dance that you would expect. However, Abe-san, Mr. Abe had recently piped up about needing to defend Taiwan if China moves against Taiwan, which people expect is going to happen soon. And
I don't know. I find it's weird though, because you have to remember to keep in mind that there was speculation that he had resigned from the position, not just because of those unfortunate scandals, but because he was having very serious health issues. So even if you wanted to take him out, if he already had an aggressive sickness, what's the significance of taking him out now? Why did he need to be gone now?
Because he's still speaking, even though he resigned. He very recently, like after resigning, he was still speaking up about like, hey, we should increase military spending, supporting candidates that want to increase military spending, and talking about Taiwan. And China does not want anybody talking about Taiwan. The spokesperson for the ministry, for the Minister of Foreign Affairs, so basically like the spokesperson for our equivalent of Secretary of State, actually said, clapped back at Shinzo Abe and said like something to the effect of, if Abe, wants Japan to get involved with Taiwan, he'll be met with a bloodbath. Now, that's, your typical Chinese saber rattling. I don't think you should read too much into that. But if you're putting your tinfoil hat on, some people are speculating there may have been something there. I have heard that, yeah, the Chinese politicians are doing what politicians are supposed to do when someone gets assassinated. However, on Weibo, which is the Chinese Twitter, people are rejoicing. They are celebrating the death of Abe because they see him as a—
Really?
Yes. It's a nation of 1 billion people. You got to fringe. Like you're going to have, I'm not saying all billion people are out there doing that. It's 1.4, 1.5 billion people at this point. So you're going to have a fringe, but that has been played up in conservative circles like Breitbart. You see, they're celebrating, like, that could just be a few thousand people, if that. And they are trying to remove those posts from Weibo because the CCP controls it.
You did a study abroad in Asia, Jay, at one point. Where did you study and what was that experience like?
Hong Kong University for all of 2012.
What was that experience like?
It was awesome. I loved Hong Kong. A lot has changed there since then. It was interesting being there and talking to the Hong Kong locals about their concerns about Chinese aggression, about their concerns regarding how China wanted to treat Hong Kong, because they had, kind of an agreement. Of course, it was a British colony. It was turned over early, before it was scheduled to be turned over. So it was turned over ahead of schedule with the promise that there would be, I think, 50 years of, kind of stability and they wouldn't change anything. But then slowly but surely, the Chinese government did, start making some changes. Those changes started off as being small, and then those changes ultimately resulted in being very large. And so being there in 2012 when they had an election, and people were concerned that the folks who were allowed to run and win all were essentially like people who had the support of the central government. And then since then, what we've seen recently with like protests in Hong Kong, largely because they believe their autonomy is being stripped away, this is what these people thought was going to happen. Their worst nightmare is actually happening. And having talked to some of the activists out there back then who were like, freshmen in college and stuff, those are now the people that are like leading the umbrella movement, or, they're related to the folks that are doing it. Cause I think there are some college students that are leaders in that space. So I say all of that to say like, things are definitely changing and it's a fluid situation.